I thought my husband and I were working towards our future. Turns out, he was secretly draining our savings to buy his sister a dream home, without telling me. When I found out, I refused to let it slide. I fought back in a way he never saw coming. It all started as a normal evening. I had just finished washing the dishes when I decided to check our savings account. It was something I did every few weeks, just a quick glance to see how far we'd come. My husband and I had been saving for years, working towards our first home, a future vacation, maybe even kids one day. Every extra dollar we could spare went into that account, slowly building up what we always called our Fresh Start Fund. But when I logged in that night, my stomach dropped. The balance was wrong. At first, I thought I was seeing things. I blinked, refreshed the page, checked the account number. But no, the number was real. More than half of our savings were gone. Thousands of dollars had vanished. A wave of panic crashed over me as I scrolled through the transaction history, my fingers trembling. Large withdrawals had been made in chunks over the past few months, but the details were vague. No clear descriptions, no notes, just money disappearing from the account we had built together. My mind raced, jumping to the worst possibilities. Was he gambling? Had he been scammed? Was there someone else? My throat tightened as I grabbed my phone and called him. No answer. I called again, straight to voicemail. I paced the living room, my heart hammering, waiting for him to call back. My mind was a mess of anger and fear. If he was in trouble, why hadn't he told me? If he had done something reckless, how could he be so careless with our future? Hours passed, and still, no response. The longer I waited, the more my anger grew. By the time I heard his key in the lock, I was already standing in the middle of the room, phone in hand, ready for an explanation. He stepped inside, looking exhausted, completely unaware of the storm he was walking into. I didn't even let him take off his shoes. Where's our money? The words came out sharp, slicing through the quiet. He froze, keys still in his hand. What? Our savings. I held up my phone, shaking, the transaction history still glaring on the screen. Half of it is gone. Where is it? His expression shifted, a flicker of something I couldn't quite place. Guilt, hesitation. But then, just as quickly, it was gone. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. It's fine. I had to use some of it. I let out a sharp, bitter laugh. Some of it? Thousands of dollars? Over months? I took a step closer, my voice trembling with controlled fury. Don't lie to me. Just tell me the truth. He wouldn't meet my eyes. It's complicated. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. Complicated. That was the kind of answer people gave when they didn't want to tell the truth. My stomach twisted, and suddenly, a terrible thought hit me. My breath caught in my throat. Who did you give it to? Silence. And then I knew. It hit me like a truck, a sickening realization sinking into my bones. Your sister, I whispered. His shoulders stiffened, his whole body going rigid. He still wouldn't look at me, which only confirmed what I already knew. I felt dizzy, my mind struggling to process what he had done. His sister. Of course. The same sister who had spent her entire life depending on him. Always taking, never giving. The one who conveniently never had money when she needed it, but somehow always managed to splurge on herself. The one who had turned my husband into her personal bank, manipulating him with guilt until he folded every single time. She needed help, he muttered, voice low. My hands were shaking. She always needs help. His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He knew I was right. I couldn't breathe. This wasn't just a bad financial decision. This was betrayal. Our savings weren't justice to give. That money was meant for us. The sacrifices, the skipped date nights, the extra shifts at work, every penny we had put away had been for our future. And he had given it away without even telling me. My voice cracked as I spoke again. You lied to me. For months. You let me believe we were building something together while you... I swallowed the lump in my throat. While you gave our future away. He finally looked at me then, and for the first time I saw it. The guilt. The realization of what he had done. But it wasn't enough. I was going to tell you, he said weakly. I shook my head, laughing bitterly. When? After it was all gone? After she moved into whatever ridiculous house you bought her with our savings? His silence was answer enough. I felt the air leave my lungs, the weight of everything crashing down at once. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about trust. About partnership. And at that moment I realized something. I wasn't sure I could ever trust him again. I stared at him, waiting for an answer, but all he gave me was a tired sigh, like I was the one overreacting. It was an emergency, he said, rubbing his face. I needed to help. My blood boiled at the casual way he said it. An emergency? That was the word he chose? I had spent the last few hours imagining worst-case scenarios, hospital bills, debts, something that had forced his hand. But this wasn't something sudden or unavoidable. This wasn't an emergency. This was months of deceit. Months of him looking me in the eyes, knowing what he was doing, and saying nothing. I crossed my arms, keeping my voice level even though my whole body was shaking. Help who? Silence. I knew the answer before he said it, but hearing it out loud still sent a fresh wave of rage crashing through me. My sister, he muttered. I had to close my eyes for a second, breathe through the fury clawing at my throat. Your sister, I repeated slowly. My voice was eerily calm, even to me. What exactly did she need so badly that it required wiping out half of our savings? He hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything. He knew how bad it sounded. I took a step closer. Tell me. She wanted the house. For a moment, I actually thought I had misheard him. A house. A house? My stomach twisted violently. I let out a sharp, disbelieving laugh, shaking my head. He rushed to explain, his voice desperate now. She's been struggling. You know how hard it's been for her. She wanted to move into a bigger place, but she didn't have enough for a down payment and I held up a hand, stopping him before he could finish. I needed a second to process, to force down the nausea rising in my chest. I had spent years of my life carefully budgeting, setting aside every extra cent, making sacrifices because I believed in the future we were building. I had turned down vacations, skipped nights out with friends, picked up extra work just so we could have something real. A home of our own. Stability. And now, all those years of careful planning, all those nights of worrying over bills, of pushing through exhaustion to save just a little more, they had all gone into buying his sister's dream home. I looked at him, my voice shaking. You used our money, our future, and you gave it to her. He winced. It's not like that. It's exactly like that. I felt my hands ball into fists at my sides. She is not your child. She is not your responsibility. I am your wife. This money was supposed to be for us. She needed help, he insisted, as if that justified it. She didn't have anyone else. I let out another hollow laugh, shaking my head. She didn't have anyone else because she never tries. She always leans on you, and you let her. You always have. She's family. That word sent ice through my veins. Family. As if I wasn't. As if my years of standing beside him, of sacrificing for our shared goals, counted for nothing compared to his sister's wants. I inhaled sharply, forcing myself to stay in control. And what about me? I asked, my voice raw. What about our futures? He opened his mouth, then closed it again like he didn't have an answer. Like he hadn't even thought about it. And that was when I knew. He hadn't thought about me. Not once. He had drained our savings, stolen our plans, rewritten our future, without even considering what it would do to me. I took a shaky breath, blinking rapidly. You lied to me, I whispered, the weight of it settling like a stone in my chest. For months, he had looked me in the eyes every single day, kissed me goodbye in the mornings, held my hand at night, and never once did he think I deserved to know what he was doing. And that hurt more than the money ever could. I turned away from him, trying to think, trying to breathe. My hands were shaking. I was going to tell you, he tried again, his voice softer now. I let out a bitter laugh. When? After she sent you a housewarming invitation? He flinched but said nothing. The worst part was I knew his sister. I knew she wouldn't feel bad about this. I could already hear her excuses, her justifications. Well, he offered. It's not my fault he didn't tell you. You're overreacting. I clenched my jaw. No. I would not be made to feel unreasonable. Not when I was the only person in this situation who had been wronged. My husband sighed, rubbing his temples like he was the one who had been blindsided. Look, we can rebuild it. It's not like we lost everything. I turned on him, my fury rekindling instantly. We didn't lose anything. You gave it away. He had the audacity to look frustrated, like I was being difficult. You're acting like this is the end of the world. I stared at him in disbelief. It's the end of trust. Silence. The weight of my words hung between us, and I saw the moment he realized the damage wasn't just financial. It was something deeper, something he couldn't just fix by saying the right words. But I wasn't done. Not even close. I squared my shoulders, my voice firm. I want it back. He frowned. What? The money. Every last cent. I don't care how you do it. I don't care if she has to sell the house, if you take out a loan, if you beg her for it back. I want it back. His expression darkened. That's not fair. Oh, I'm not being fair? I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. You stole from me. You made a massive financial decision without me. And now you're telling me I'm the one who's being unreasonable? She's already moved in, he said, exasperated. The money is gone. My stomach twisted. Gone. Just like that. Years of work, years of sacrifice, erased like it had never mattered. I inhaled sharply and turned away. If he thought I was just going to roll over and accept this, he had severely underestimated me. He had made his choice. Now it was my turn to make mine. I stood there, staring at him, feeling something inside me shatter. I wasn't even sure what it was. My trust? My belief in our partnership? Maybe just the naive assumption that the man I had married saw me as his priority. But now, looking at him, his jaw tight, his arms crossed defensively, his eyes darting anywhere but at me, I knew the truth. I had been wrong. I asked him one simple question. Did you ever plan to tell me? Silence. He didn't even try to lie this time. He just stood there. I waited for him to say something. Anything. That would make this feel less like a betrayal. But all I got was that awful, suffocating silence. I let out a slow breath, my hands trembling at my sides. So that's it then? My voice was quieter than I expected. You were just going to let me go on thinking we had a future together? That we were building something real? While you were out here, handing our savings to your sister, like it was spare change. His jaw tensed and he finally spoke. It's not like that. I let out a sharp, bitter laugh. Oh, then what is it like? He rubbed a hand over his face. She needed it more than we did. I actually felt dizzy with rage. My chest was tight, my throat burning with the effort it took not to scream. More than we did. I took a step closer, forcing him to look at me. More than your wife did? He flinched, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. We have spent years working for this. Every single decision we made, every sacrifice, every skipped dinner out, every time I picked up an extra shift instead of relaxing with you, it was all for this. For us. I swallowed hard, my voice shaking. And you just gave it away. Without even asking me. He finally met my eyes then, and for the first time, I saw it. He wasn't sorry. He wasn't ashamed. He was annoyed. Like I was overreacting. Like I was making a big deal out of nothing. Look, he sighed, crossing his arms. We can always save again. I felt something snap inside me. I don't even remember moving. 1 second, I was standing across from him. The next, I had grabbed the nearest object, a book from the coffee table, and hurled it across the room. It hit the wall with a loud thud, knocking over a framed picture of us from our wedding day. He startled, his eyes going wide, but I wasn't done. Oh, we can always save again. My voice was cold now, laced with something sharp and unforgiving. You say that like money just magically appears. Like all those years of work don't matter. Like my effort, my sacrifices, my trust, like none of it matters. He exhaled harshly, shaking his head. That's not what I meant, but that's what you said. Silence again. I closed my eyes for a moment, forcing myself to breathe. I could feel my pulse hammering in my throat, my hands still shaking with adrenaline. I need you to hear me, and I need you to actually listen for once. I looked him dead in the eye. This isn't about the money. He frowned. Then what is it about? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. It's about respect. It's about partnership. It's about the fact that you don't see me as your wife. My voice cracked on that last word, but I pushed through. I thought we were a team. I thought we made decisions together. But now I realize I was never your partner. His face darkened. That's not fair. Fair. My eyes burned, but I refused to let the tears fall. I refused to give him the satisfaction of thinking he had broken me. You want to talk about fair? Fair would have been you treating me like an equal. Fair would have been you coming to me and saying, hey, I want to help my sister, can we talk about it? Fair would have been you respecting the fact that I deserved a say in what happened to our future. I took a shaky breath. But you didn't do any of that. You made a decision that affected both of us, and you did it behind my back. His hands balled into fists at his sides. I didn't think you'd understand. I stared at him in disbelief. You didn't think I'd understand? I let out a bitter, humorless laugh. You're right. I don't understand. I don't understand how you could look me in the face every single day, knowing what you were doing, and lie to me. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration clear in his every movement. I was trying to do the right thing. For who? My voice cracked. Because it sure as hell wasn't for me. He exhaled sharply. She's my sister, and I'm your wife. That stopped him. Just for a second. Just long enough for me to see something flicker in his eyes. Doubt, guilt, regret. I don't know. But whatever it wasn't enough. Because the next words out of his mouth shattered the last fragile thread holding me together. You're not being rational. I actually laughed. A hollow, empty sound. Right. I'm not being rational. I shook my head, stepping back, suddenly exhausted. You know what? I don't think you even realize what you've done. I don't think you care. His expression shifted, a flash of something defensive. Of course I care. No, I cut him off, my voice steadier now. Colder. If you cared, you wouldn't have done this. If you cared, you would have told me. If you cared, you wouldn't be standing here right now trying to make me feel like the problem. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. And that was it. That was the moment I realized this was never going to change. I had been fooling myself into thinking we were a team, but the truth was, I had been in a financial arrangement where my husband played provider, not to me, but to his sister. She would always come first. No matter how much I loved him, no matter how much I fought for us, she would always be the priority. And I would always be the afterthought. I felt something inside me go quiet. Not anger, not sadness, just emptiness. I took a deep breath. Then I turned and walked toward the bedroom. Where are you going? He asked, wary. I didn't look back. To decide if this marriage is worth saving, and for the first time, I wasn't sure it was. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, disbelief, a deep, gut-wrenching betrayal that I couldn't shake. My husband was in the other room, probably pretending this was just a stupid fight that would blow over in a day or two. But he didn't understand. This wasn't something that could be forgiven with an apology. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a simple mistake. He had stolen from me. He had stolen from us. And he didn't even think he had done anything wrong. I pushed myself up, grabbed my phone, and walked back into the living room where he was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone like nothing had happened. The sight of him, so calm, so unbothered, made my blood boil all over again. I didn't give him a chance to pretend everything was fine. I want it back, I said, my voice sharp, unwavering. He glanced up confused. What? Our savings? I folded my arms across my chest. Every last cent. I don't care how you do it, sell the house, get a loan, beg your sister, but I want it back. He blinked at me like I had just suggested something insane. Then, to my absolute fury, he laughed. She's already moved in, he said, shaking his head. The money is gone. Gone. Just like that. Years of saving, of planning, of sacrificing. It had all been handed over to his sister like a casual gift. And now I was just supposed to accept that? Move on like it didn't matter? Like I didn't matter? I felt something inside me snap. You had no right to do this, I hissed. None. You stole from me. From us. And you think you can just sit there and laugh? His amusement faded, replaced by irritation. I didn't steal from you, he snapped. I used our money to help my family. I scoffed. Your family? What the hell am I then? A roommate? A business partner? I took a step closer, my hands trembling with fury. I thought marriage meant making decisions together. But I guess I was wrong. You don't see me as an equal. You don't even see me as worth consulting when it comes to life-changing financial decisions. He rolled his eyes. You're being dramatic. That single sentence made me want to scream. Dramatic. Dramatic. The way he dismissed my emotions so easily, like I was the problem, made me sick. I worked just as hard for that money as you did, I said, my voice shaking with anger. I made sacrifices. I planned. I dreamed of our future. And you just, my breath hitched, my throat tightening. You just gave it away. His jaw clenched, but he didn't say anything. He knew I was right. I took a slow, deep breath. I wasn't going to let him manipulate me into feeling like I was the unreasonable one. Not this time. So that's it? I asked coldly. You're just okay with throwing away our future for her? She needed it more than we did, he repeated, like that was some kind of justification. I let out a bitter laugh. She wanted it more. That's not the same thing. Silence. I shook my head, stepping back. You know what?
Fine.
If you won't fix this, I will. His eyes narrowed. What does that mean? It means I'm not letting this go. I will get my money back. One way or another. He sighed, rubbing his temples. For God's sake, it's done. Move on. Move on? He really thought this was just going to go away. I turned and walked to the guest room, slamming the door behind me. I couldn't stand to look at him. The betrayal was too fresh, too raw. But if he thought I was just going to cry myself to sleep and let this slide, he had severely underestimated me. The next morning, I woke up with a plan. I grabbed my laptop, sat down at the kitchen table, and started researching. I wanted to know if there was anything I could do legally. It was a joint account, sure, but if he had taken money without my knowledge or consent, there had to be some way to fight back. I barely looked at him when he walked in, yawning like he had slept soundly, while I had been up half the night seething. He poured himself a cup of coffee, then finally noticed me at the table. What are you doing? I didn't look up. Seeing what my legal options are, that woke him up fast. He lowered his coffee cup, staring at me. You're joking? I met his gaze, unflinching. Try me. His jaw tightened. You're seriously going to take legal action? Against me? Over this? This isn't just this, I snapped. You didn't just buy a TV without asking me. You wiped out half of our savings to buy your sister a house without even having the decency to tell me. And now, you're acting like I should just shrug it off. He set his coffee down with a loud thud. You're being ridiculous. I closed my laptop slowly, my hand steady.
No.
What's ridiculous is that I have to fight to be treated with the same respect you so easily give your sister. I stood up, leveling him with a glare. You might think this is over. But trust me, it's just getting started. For the first time since this whole thing started, I saw something flicker across his face. Not anger. Not frustration.
Fear. Good.
He should be scared. Because I wasn't backing down. Not this time. I didn't tell my husband where I was going. I didn't need to. The moment he realized I was serious about getting my money back, he had started walking on eggshells around me, watching my every move like he was waiting for me to explode. But I wasn't going to waste my breath arguing with someone who had already made it clear where his loyalties lay. I needed to go straight to the source. So the next morning, I drove to her house. The house. The one my husband had drained our savings to buy. It was in a quiet, upscale neighborhood. Not a mansion, but definitely a step up from the apartment she had been complaining about for years. The yard was freshly landscaped, the porch decorated with cute little planters, and a new welcome mat. It made me sick to my stomach. She had already made herself at home. I barely registered walking up the driveway before I was knocking on the door, my hands gripping my sides to keep from shaking. I didn't even know what I was going to say. I just knew I wasn't leaving without making her understand exactly what she had taken from me. The door opened and there she was. She had the audacity to smile when she saw me.
Oh. Hey.
What's up?
I didn't smile back.
Didn't waste time on small talk. I cut straight to the point. My husband stole from me to pay for this house. Her smile flickered, but she recovered fast, leaning casually against the doorframe. I don't know what he told you, but he offered to help me. I didn't steal anything. I felt my nails dig into my palms. He drained our savings. Money we had been putting away for years. He gave it to you without my knowledge. That is not helping you. That is theft. She rolled her eyes, and I had to physically force myself not to slap the expression off her face. Look, I get that you're upset, but that's between you two. I didn't make him do anything. I let out a slow, measured breath, willing myself to stay calm. You knew we were saving for a house. She shrugged. Yeah, and now I have one. Something inside me snapped. I stepped forward, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of unease in her expression. Do you even care? I asked, my voice eerily calm. Do you even feel bad for what you've done? She scowled. What? For accepting help from my brother? No, I don't feel bad. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're unbelievable. She crossed her arms. You're acting like I forced him to give me the money. He chose to. You manipulated him into it, I snapped. You have been using him as your personal bank for years, and you know it. Her expression turned smug. Maybe if you had been more supportive of him helping his family, he wouldn't have had to go behind your back. My whole body went rigid. Are you actually blaming me for this? She shrugged. I mean, if you had just agreed to help in the first place, he wouldn't have had to sneak around. I took a slow step back, shaking my head in disbelief.
Wow.
You really don't feel an ounce of guilt, do you? She sighed dramatically, looking at me like I was the problem. I don't see why I should feel guilty. I didn't do anything wrong. I scoffed. You accepted money that wasn't his to give. You knew what you were doing. You just didn't care. She gave me a pointed look. He's my brother. He wanted to help his family. I stared at her, something ice-cold settling in my chest. I am his family. She snorted. You're his wife. That's not the same thing. It took everything in me not to slap her across the face. I took a slow, deep breath, willing myself to stay in control. You are a selfish, entitled brat who has been leeching off him for years. She narrowed her eyes. And you're a bitter, controlling wife who doesn't understand what family means. I clenched my jaw so hard it hurt. I will get that money back. One way or another. She laughed. Actually laughed. Good luck with that. The money's gone. The house is in my name. There's nothing you can do. She moved to shut the door, but I caught it before it could close, my grip like iron. She looked startled, and I leaned in, my voice dangerously low. You think this is over? You think I'm just going to walk away and let you get away with this? She smirked. I think you don't have a choice. I held her gaze for a long moment. Then, slowly, I released the door, stepping back onto the porch. I took in a house, the house I had paid for without ever agreeing to it. I let the anger settle into something sharper, something more determined. She had no idea who she was messing with. Without another word, I turned and walked back to my car. I didn't slam the door. Didn't let her see how much she had gotten to me. But as I pulled out of the driveway, my hands clenched the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. This wasn't just about my husband's betrayal anymore. I was fighting an entire mindset of entitlement, a family dynamic that had been broken for years. And if they thought I was just going to roll over and accept this, they had severely underestimated me. I barely spoke to my husband after confronting his sister. He knew something was wrong. Of course he did, but he still had no idea that I'd gone straight to her new house. And honestly, I wasn't in the mood to explain myself. Every time I looked at him, I saw the man who had stolen my future, handed it off to someone else, and then had the audacity to act like I was the unreasonable one for being upset about it. I wasn't going to argue with him anymore. Words clearly didn't mean anything to him. Actions, though, that was something else entirely. So while he sulked around the house, giving me exasperated looks every time I ignored his attempts at small talk, I was busy. Every spare moment I had, I was researching. I combed through financial forums, legal websites, and marriage law resources. I wanted to know if I had any options. I wanted to know if he could really get away with this, if I was just supposed to accept the fact that he had stolen my money and there was nothing I could do about it. The first thing I learned, because the account had both of our names on it, technically he had the legal right to withdraw the money. But there was always a but. If the withdrawals had been made without my consent, and if they had been used in a way that significantly harmed my financial stability or well-being, I did have legal grounds to challenge it. Especially if I could prove that he had intentionally hidden it from me. That was the first bit of hope I had felt in days. So I took the next step. I set up a consultation with a lawyer. The day of my appointment, I left the house without telling my husband where I was going. He barely looked up from his phone when I walked out the door. It was like he had convinced himself that if he ignored the problem long enough, it would just go away. I almost wanted him to keep thinking that. It would make what was coming next even better. When I arrived at the law office, I felt a knot of anxiety in my stomach. I had never had to meet with a lawyer before, at least not for something like this. But the moment I sat down across from him and started explaining my situation, I knew I had made the right choice. He listened carefully, nodding occasionally, jotting down notes as I spoke. When I finally finished, he leaned back in his chair and let out a slow breath. You definitely have options, he said. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. What kind of options? Well, first of all, since you're legally married, you have a right to the shared assets in your account. The fact that he withdrew the money without your consent is important. Courts don't take kindly to financial deceit in a marriage, especially when one spouse has been left in a significantly worse position because of it. I nodded, my heart pounding. So, what does that mean exactly? It means that if you pursue this, you could take legal action to recover your portion of the money. Potentially more, depending on how the case is argued. I gripped the edge of the desk. Even if the money is gone? The lawyer gave me a small, knowing smile. Gone or not, that's not your problem. He took it. He gave it away. If a court rules in your favor, he will have to find a way to compensate you for your loss. Whether that means taking out a loan, liquidating other assets, or, he shrugged, convincing his sister to give it back, that's up to him. I took a deep breath, trying to process everything. What if I don't want to go to court? What if I just want to use this as leverage? The lawyer smiled again, but this time, it was sharper. Then you make sure he knows exactly what he's up against. You let him understand that if he doesn't fix this, you will escalate it. He closed his notebook. People tend to take things a lot more seriously when they realize there are legal consequences. I nodded slowly. I wasn't sure if I wanted to go through the stress of a lawsuit, at least not yet. But just knowing I could, that was enough for now. I left the office that day with my head held high. When I got home, my husband was on the couch, watching TV like he didn't have a care in the world. I stood in the doorway for a moment, just looking at him, wondering how he could be so casual when he had destroyed so much. I shut the door a little louder than necessary. He glanced up, frowning. Where were you? I dropped my bag on the table and crossed my arms. I had a meeting with a lawyer. His entire body tensed. You're joking? I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Do I look like I'm joking? He set the remote down, his expression darkening. Are you seriously trying to sue me over this? I tilted my head.
Why?
Are you scared? His jaw clenched. This is insane. No. What's insane is that you think you can betray me, steal from me, and then act like I should just let it go. I took a step closer. I told you, I want my money back. And now I know I have a legal right to demand it. He swallowed, his face paling slightly. You wouldn't actually do that. I just smiled. He stared at me, his mind clearly racing. This was the first time he had looked genuinely nervous since this whole thing started. I wasn't sure yet if I was actually going to take him to court. But the best part? He didn't know that. And now, for the first time, he was the one scrambling. For once, he was the one afraid of the consequences. I turned and walked to the bedroom, ignoring the way he called after me. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to waste my energy trying to make him see my side. I had played the legal card. Now, it was his move. I had never seen my husband look scared before. Not really. He had always been the kind of man who carried himself with an irritating sense of confidence, like no matter what happened, things would work out in his favor. He assumed I'd eventually cool off, that I'd come to my senses and accept his betrayal as an unfortunate misunderstanding. He truly believed this was just a temporary fight, something that would blow over once I got tired of being angry. But this time, I wasn't just angry. I wasn't even yelling. I was calm. And that terrified him more than anything. After I told him about my meeting with the lawyer, he just stared at me. His face lost all color, his jaw tightening, his fingers gripping the couch arms so hard his knuckles went white. It was like I had finally said the one thing he hadn't accounted for. You wouldn't actually do that, he said, but his voice lacked confidence. I tilted my head, watching him. Why wouldn't I? He blinked. Because it's me. We're married. I laughed, but it was hollow.
Right.
We're married. And yet, somehow, that didn't stop you from betraying me. He exhaled sharply, rubbing his face. Jesus, this is insane. No, I said, crossing my arms. What's insane is that you stole from me, gave our money away without my knowledge, and then expected me to just accept it. He sat forward, his hands clasped between his knees. What exactly did your lawyer say? I smiled coldly. That I have options. That I have a very strong case if I decide to take legal action. And that if I pursue this, you'll be held responsible for repaying every cent. I watched as the reality of it settled in. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed, his knee bouncing up and down, a nervous habit I had seen before, but never directed at me. He looked away, staring at the floor. You're serious, he muttered. As serious as you were when you drained our savings without telling me, I shot back. His knee stopped bouncing. He glanced up, eyes darting toward me like he was searching for a hint of hesitation, some sign that I was bluffing. But I wasn't. And for the first time, he knew it. I turned to leave the room, but as I passed him, I caught a glimpse of his phone screen. His hands were clenched around it, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He was texting someone frantically. His sister. I didn't even need to see the name to know. That night, I barely spoke to him. I went through my evening routine like he wasn't even there, brushing my teeth, climbing into the guest bed, scrolling through my phone like I had no husband at all. And the entire time, I could feel his eyes on me, watching, waiting, trying to figure out if I was really about to turn his life upside down. I could hear him in the other room, pacing. Then, the vibration of his phone. Over and over again. He was scrambling. For the first time since this nightmare started, he was the one who didn't know what to do. And that gave me more satisfaction than I had felt in days. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of him on the phone. He was standing in the kitchen, speaking in hushed, frantic tones. I couldn't make out every word, but I heard enough. She's actually serious. A pause. No, I don't know what to do. She won't listen to me. Another pause. Because she talked to a lawyer, that's why. This isn't just some fight. She's going to take me to court over this. I smirked, stretching out on the guest bed. I took my time getting up, making sure he heard me moving around before I finally walked into the kitchen. He stiffened immediately, turning his back toward me, still gripping the phone like it was a lifeline. I knew exactly who he was talking to. His sister. I walked straight to the fridge, ignoring him as I grabbed the orange juice and poured myself a glass. He was trying to keep his voice low, but I could still hear the frustration creeping in. I don't know how to fix this, okay? She won't drop it. She wants the money back. There was another long pause, and then he let out a sharp laugh. Bitter, irritated. I told you she'd be mad, didn't I? But no, you said it would be fine. That she'd understand. Well, guess what? She doesn't understand. And now she's talking about legal action, so what the hell do we do now? I sipped my orange juice slowly, enjoying the unraveling panic in his voice. Then suddenly his shoulders tensed. I knew the moment his sister must have said something he didn't like, because his whole body stiffened, his fingers tightening around his phone like he was trying to physically hold back his frustration. What do you mean that's not your problem? He snapped. I nearly choked on my drink. His sister. The one he had betrayed me for. The one he had sacrificed our future for. She was washing her hands of it. I leaned against the counter, watching him. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. I gave you that money. You said you'd. He cut himself off, listening. Then his entire face twisted with barely contained anger. I waited, watching him with interest. Then, finally, he let out a humorless laugh.
Wow.
Okay. I didn't know what his sister had just said to him, but it must have been bad because he suddenly yanked the phone away from his ear and ended the call without another word. He just stood there, gripping the device like he wanted to throw it across the room. I raised an eyebrow. Problem. His head snapped toward me. His mouth opened, like he was about to argue, like he wanted to yell. Maybe, but then just as quickly, he closed it again. He looked exhausted. Defeated. I smiled. Don't worry, I said, setting my glass in the sink. You'll figure it out. Then I turned and walked back to the guest room, leaving him standing there in silence. I didn't need to hear the conversation to know exactly what had happened. He had backed himself into a corner, thinking his sister would help him fix this. But she wasn't going to. She had gotten what she wanted. She had her house, her money, and now he was the one left to deal with the fallout. For the first time since this entire nightmare started, my husband was realizing what I had known all along. His sister never cared about him. Not the way he cared about her. Not the way I used to care about him. And that realization? That was his wake-up call. A few days passed in tense silence. My husband barely spoke to me, barely looked at me, but I could feel his panic every time we were in the same room. He was waiting, dreading what I might do next. I let him sit in that fear. I wanted him to feel the uncertainty I had felt when I first realized our savings had disappeared. I wanted him to understand what it was like to have your future ripped out from under you with no warning, no discussion, no say in the matter. I didn't have to guess what was happening behind the scenes. I knew he was desperately trying to find a way to fix this before I actually took legal action. He had already tried to get his sister to help, and she had made it clear that wasn't her problem. Now, I imagined he was scrambling, debating whether he could somehow talk me down. But he wouldn't, because I wasn't budging. And then, just as I expected, the moment came. My phone rang, and I didn't even need to look at the screen to know who it was. I picked up, already bracing myself. The second I answered, his sister's voice exploded through the speaker. "Are you insane?" she shrieked. I pulled the phone slightly away from my ear, resisting the urge to smirk. "Good morning to you, too." She didn't even acknowledge the sarcasm. "You're ruining everything," she screamed. "He promised me this house." I sat down at the kitchen table, perfectly calm. "And he promised me a future." But I guess promises don't mean much to him, do they? You're being selfish, she spat. You don't even need the money. You're just doing this to be a B*T. I almost laughed at that. I leaned back in my chair, twirling the edge of my sleeve between my fingers. Let me get this straight, I said slowly. I'm selfish because I want back the money that I worked for? But you taking that money without my consent is fine. She scoffed. He offered it to me. It's not my fault you weren't involved in that decision. And why do you think I wasn't involved? I asked smoothly. Because he knew I wouldn't agree to it. Because he knew what he was doing was wrong. She let out a sharp breath, clearly getting more frustrated by the second. This is his money too. He can do whatever he wants with it.
Sure, I said.
And I can do whatever I want with my legal rights. That shut her up for a moment. I let the silence drag, savoring it. Then, when I knew she was still there, still listening, I continued, my voice calm but firm. You don't get to call me selfish when you're the one who took something that wasn't yours. If you want a house so badly, go earn it yourself. Get a loan.
Get a second job.
Do anything other than manipulating your brother into throwing away his marriage for you.
She hated that.
I could hear it in the sharp inhale she took, in the way she fumbled for words before finally shrieking, "You're a psychopath." I smirked. And yet, I'm still smarter than you. That was it. That was the moment she cracked. She completely lost it, hurling every insult she could think of, her voice shaking with rage. I let her rant, let her scream, because it didn't matter. I had already won. She was panicking. She knew I wasn't going to let this go. She knew this wasn't just an argument that would fade with time. She was finally realizing what I had known from the start. I was not backing down. And that scared her. Because for once in her life, she wasn't getting exactly what she wanted. Finally, after another string of incoherent insults, she let out an exasperated scream and hung up on me. I stared at my phone for a moment, then set it down on the table, exhaling slowly.
Good.
Let her panic. Let her feel the consequences for once in her life. I sat there for a long time, staring out the window, my mind oddly quiet. I should have felt exhausted, drained from the screaming, the tension, the sheer ridiculousness of this entire situation. But instead, I felt satisfied. I had spent years biting my tongue, watching my husband let his sister walk all over him, listening to her whine about every inconvenience in her life, like it was the world's responsibility to fix it. I had played nice. I had been patient. I had let things slide. Not anymore. I wasn't her doormat. I wasn't my husband's afterthought. I was done being the one who had to compromise. And if they thought this was bad, they had no idea what was coming next. My husband was desperate. I could see it in the way he hovered near me, watching my every move like he was waiting for me to snap out of whatever phase he thought I was going through. Like he still believed this was something I'd get over. But he was wrong. After his sister's meltdown, things shifted. He was more nervous, more on edge. He finally understood that I wasn't just venting my frustration. I wasn't making empty threats. I meant it when I said I wanted my money back. And now that his sister had made it clear she wasn't going to help him fix this mess, he was running out of options. I caught him staring at me across the kitchen that night, his hands clenched on the counter. He looked like he wanted to say something, but he hesitated, like he was trying to find the right words. I didn't help him. I just stood there, arms crossed, waiting. Finally, he let out a shaky breath and ran a hand through his hair. "We can fix this." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, we can." He winced, already sensing the incoming argument. "I mean, I can." He took a cautious step closer. "I know I screwed up. I know I hurt you. But please, just let's not do anything drastic, okay? We can rebuild our savings. Together." I stared at him, searching his face for any sign of the man I had once trusted, once loved. But all I saw was desperation. Not because he realized how badly he had hurt me. Not because he was truly sorry. But because he was afraid of what I would do next. I set my glass down on the counter carefully, then met his gaze. "Let me ask you something," I said, my voice steady. "If I hadn't found out, would you have ever told me?" His lips parted slightly, but no words came out. That was all the answer I needed. I let out a soft, bitter laugh. "That's what I thought." He took another step forward, his voice urgent now. "I was going to tell you. I didn't know how. I knew you'd be mad." "Oh, don't give me that," I snapped, my patience finally cracking. "You did not tell me because you were afraid of my reaction. You didn't tell me because you knew what you were doing was wrong. He inhaled sharply, like my words had physically hit him. I didn't stop. You stole from me, I said, my voice like ice. You betrayed me. And now, you expect me to just trust you again? To start over like none of this ever happened? I shook my head. It doesn't work like that. He swallowed hard. So what? You want to ruin our marriage over money? I froze, my jaw tightening. Money.
That was still all this was to him.
I took a slow step closer, forcing him to look me in the eyes. This isn't about the money anymore. This is about trust. My voice shook slightly, but I pushed through. And you destroyed it. Silence. For the first time since this nightmare started, I saw something crack in his expression. A flicker of realization. Like it was finally sinking in just how badly he had damaged us. But it was too late. I exhaled slowly, my decision solidifying in my mind. You have one choice, I said firmly. Get the money back. Every last cent. I don't care how you do it. Sell the house. Take out a loan. Beg your sister. But if you don't, I walk. His eyes widened. Wait. No excuses. I cut him off. No negotiations. No promises to fix it later. You either fix it now, or this marriage is over. He stared at me, stunned. Like he had truly never expected me to go that far. I didn't give him a chance to argue. I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, frozen in the middle of the kitchen. For the first time in our entire relationship, I was the one in control. And I wasn't backing down. I gave him a week. 7 full days to fix what he had broken. 7 days to prove to me that I wasn't just an afterthought in my own marriage. I didn't nag, didn't argue, didn't even bring it up again. I simply waited. Because I knew that if he was going to do the right thing, it had to be his choice. He had to fight for this, for us, just as hard as I had fought to build the life he had so carelessly thrown away. But deep down, I already knew how this would end. The first couple of days, he tried to act normal. Like if we went through the motions of everyday life, this whole thing would just magically fade into the background. I barely spoke to him, and when I did, my words were short and emotionless. He noticed, of course. How could he not? But instead of fixing the problem, he avoided it. He buried himself in his phone, his work, anything but the issue at hand. On the 3rd day, I caught him on the phone with his sister. His voice was tense, his words clipped. You have to help me fix this. I paused in the hallway, listening. Do you even care what this is doing to my marriage? He snapped. Then, after a long silence, his voice dropped lower. I don't know what you want me to do, okay? She's serious. She's actually serious. He didn't know I was standing there, hearing every pathetic attempt he was making to guilt his sister into fixing his mess. And if I had to guess, she was on the other end of that line with her arms crossed, rolling her eyes, telling him it wasn't her problem. Because to her, it wasn't. She had her house, her money, her win. And now, he was left to deal with the fallout. By the end of the week, he had stopped avoiding me. Probably because he knew time was up. He came home late that night, dragging his feet like a man walking to his own execution. I was sitting on the couch, a glass of wine in hand, waiting. The second he stepped inside, he let out a heavy sigh. I can't get the money back. I took a slow sip of my wine. I figured. His jaw tightened, like my calmness irritated him. She's not selling the house. Of course she's not. And I can't take legal action against her. The house is in her name. I tilted my head. Imagine that. He exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. Look, I know this isn't what you wanted to hear, but there's nothing I can do. The money is gone. I stared at him for a long moment, letting the silence stretch. He shifted under my gaze, uncomfortable. He still didn't get it. Still thought this was about money. I set my glass down and stood up, walking toward the hallway. Okay. He blinked. Okay? I turned, meeting his eyes. Okay. My voice was quiet, steady. His forehead creased. That's it? You're just letting it go. I let out a small, humorless laugh. No. Then I walked to the bedroom, grabbed my already packed suitcase from the closet, and wheeled it out past him. His eyes widened. What are you doing? I didn't answer. I simply grabbed my purse, my keys, and headed for the door. Panic finally set in. He rushed forward, blocking my path. Wait, just wait. Can we at least talk about this? I met his gaze, unblinking.
We have talked about this.
You had your chance to fix it. You made your choice. His hands clenched at his sides. I told you. I can't fix it. No, I nodded slowly. You won't. He let out a frustrated noise, raking a hand through his hair. You're seriously ending our marriage over this? I tilted my head. Over this? You mean the fact that you stole from me? Lied to me? Prioritized your sister over your wife? Or are you talking about the part where you expected me to just accept it? He swallowed hard. I just thought. I cut him off. That I'd stay. The weight of my words settled between us, and for the first time since this all started, I saw real fear in his eyes. Because he knew. I was done. He reached for my arm, desperation seeping into his voice. Please. We can move forward from this. We can. I pulled back, shaking my head. I deserve better than this. His face crumpled. You're really leaving? I let out a slow breath, gripping the handle of my suitcase. If you want to be married to your sister's needs more than mine, you can have that life. I took a step past him, then added, without me. And with that, I walked out the door. Filing for divorce was easier than I expected. Not emotionally, because, of course, walking away from the life I had built with someone I once loved hurt. But legally, it was straightforward. My lawyer had already walked me through my options, and since my husband had so graciously made financial betrayal an undeniable part of our marriage, I had a strong case. I wouldn't get my savings back, but I'd get something better. My freedom. The day I signed the final papers, I felt lighter. I had lost money, time, trust, but I had gained myself back. And that was worth every penny. Starting over wasn't easy. I had to adjust, had to rebuild, had to figure out what life looked like without the future I had once imagined. But I did it. And let me tell you, starting over on my own felt better than any house ever could.